Okay, everybody, let's talk about what job interview questions you need to prepare for before you go to a job interview. There are many things they could ask. There are many things they could say. What do you need to do to prepare and rehearse before you go to a job interview so that you pass and you knock them dead? Let's talk about that in this video. Okay, I'm going to use my good friend ChatGPT to just step through this and offer my critique of what it says. So let's start with the basics. So here, I'll do it like this. Okay, so what are the standard job interview questions that are more traditional, that have been asked in job interviews that one could reasonably expect that they will ask in any job interview that you go to? Now, there's about 10 or so of these. They kind of vary, but I'm going to give you the lowdown on these. So here we go. The first one is tell me about yourself. Now, that is usually the icebreaker question. It's the one that they ask first. Okay. Why do you want this job? Make sure that you are prepared for this question. This question is actually the same as what are your strengths? It's also the same as why do you want to work here? Why do you want to work for this company? That kind of thing. It's all the same question. You answer it by listing your strengths. What do you know about this company? This is their verifying that you've done your research. All you need to do is about literally 5 minutes of research on this organization, and that's the test for that. Why should we hire you? That's really the same question as this. It's exactly the same thing. Okay. What are your strengths? It's also the same question. They're going to be basically asking you, like, what is it about you that you do that's your selling point? Why would we pick you instead of one of the other candidates? That's what these questions are pointing to. So, by the way, when they ask you this question, they're not saying, why should we hire you? Right? That suggests, well, the answer is because I need a job. Right? No, that's not what they're asking. They're asking, why should we hire you? Right? Instead of any of the other people that have applied for this job. What's so special about you? Right? That's what this question is. So make sure you have an answer to that. And the answer, of course, is going to be your strengths, right? Okay, here's everybody's favorite. What are your weaknesses, or what is your weakness? This is where they ask you about the negative things. What they're basically wanting to see is if you're going to eliminate yourself right off the bat. So you need a very strategic answer to this. Now, I'm going to link a playlist where I've given answers to all of these questions in depth, okay? So if you really want to get into some of these, I'm going to give you the lowdown on all those questions. Then you get the future question and the past question. So this is the past question. You know, they say, why did you leave your last job? Right? That's the idea. So if you say, well, I got fired, that suggests, oh, you're the type of person that gets fired. So if we were to hire you now, you'd probably get fired from this job too. So that's not good, right? So once again, you need a very diplomatic answer for this. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is the future question. This is basically where they're saying, they're trying to see if you fit or if you are suited to this job, right? If you say in 5 years, I want to be somewhere completely different from this, that suggests your heart's not in this. You're probably not particularly suited to it. So it's kind of a fail. Tell me about a challenge or a failure. Okay, so this is a behavioral question. This is not a standard job interview question. This is what we call a behavioral question. See? Behavioral questions, those are questions where they ask you about a particular story from your past. So usually they start with, tell me about a time, right? So they say, tell me about a time, you had to do something like this. Or tell me about a time, you had to resolve a conflict with a coworker. Or tell me about a time, you had to put out a deal with a crisis at work. What did you do, right? The nature of behavioral questions means that everybody is going to have a different answer because we all have different experiences, right? So behavioral questions are kind of interesting. You don't rehearse them like you would all other job interview questions, and we're going to get into that in a moment. Okay, so here's another type of behavioral question. Tell you about a success you're proud of. That's obviously going to be personal, what the details are. Okay, this is a standard job interview question. How do you handle conflict? Now, I want you, just make sure I'm showing this on the screen here. Okay, so we've got behavioral questions. Tell you about a challenge or failure. Tell you about a success you've had. How do you handle conflict? Now, this is not a behavioral question. If you notice, they're not asking you, tell me about a time that you had a conflict. What did you do? How did you handle it? Right? They're not asking for a specific story. They're saying, how do you handle this? Like, what is your method? Right? So that is a standard job interview question. You could explain, their strategy to diffusing conflict. And then finally, you get this question, do you have any questions for us? This is the last question in a job interview. And make no mistake, this question is every bit as much a performance as all the other questions are. Don't start getting brutally honest on this question and saying, how much does it pay? Do I have to work till 5 p.m.? Things like this. Don't start letting the guard down on this question because you are signaling some very important stuff. This is the last chance you have to make a good impression before the end of the interview. So learn what to do there. Okay. Now, there's a bunch of stuff here, but let's see here. Now, okay, so that handles both the traditional job interview questions and also behavioral questions. Now, let's get into behavioral questions a little bit, because the obvious thing is, what types of behavioral questions are they expected to ask? Because it's going to be more than just what you listed here. For example, they may ask about more than just your successes and more than just your failures. They may ask about specific things like conflict. Have you dealt with conflict with a coworker? What did you do? Have you dealt with conflict with a boss? What did you do? Did you have any kind of ethical moral dilemma where, the company rules said one thing, but perhaps, ethics said something else? How did you resolve it? Another area I believe is creativity. They say, tell me about a time where you showed creativity on the job. What did you do? Initiative, tell me about a time you showed initiative on the job, things like this. So there are many different types of behavioral questions. What are the common areas that behavioral questions cover in most job interviews? Let's get that. Because the way you prepare for these things is you do it in reverse. You first figure, what your answers, what your stories are, and then you come with 10 or so very well rehearsed stories that you've practiced saying in the very compact format like STAR. And then depending on what behavioral question they ask you, you pull out one of your 10 stories. That's a common way to do it. So the main behavioral question categories. So conflict and interpersonal skills. Tell me about a conflict with a worker. Okay. Disagreement with your boss, difficult client or stakeholder, as per your industry. Failure, mistakes, and accountability. Tell me about a failure, a mistake you made, a time things didn't go as planned. Like, how did you do it? Did you admit to it? Did you fix it? Like this kind of thing, right? And it makes a great point here, actually. Are you safe to hire? Because what they're doing is whatever you say to these questions, all of these questions from the very beginning, whatever you say, you're talking about stuff you did in the past, but these people are interpreting your answer to mean this is what you will do if they hire you and put you in that situation, right? So keep that in mind. If you did something a certain way in the past, that's fine. The big question is, would you do it again if you were in that situation again? If the answer is yes, then it's maybe appropriate to say. If the answer is no, you don't want to be telling that story in the job interview. Okay, achievement and impact, a success you're proud of, a goal you achieved. So basically your accomplishments, your best accomplishments. In Initiative and ownership. Okay, that's kind of an extension of what we were talking about before. Here we go. Problem solving and critical thinking. If you have an example of, something that you had to work really hard, you have to think really hard and come up with a difficult solution. That's really good. So keep that in mind, because they're going to be asking you about accomplishments, right? As we already established, wherever that was. Achievement and impact. So if you have a story where you had an accomplishment and it was something that also required this, then that's a twofer, right? You can tell that story to whichever question they ask you. Teamwork and collaboration. This is going to be very important. Make sure you prepare some stories that involve teamwork and collaboration. So working with other people, how you interoperated with them, how you communicated with them. That stuff is very important. They're probably going to ask you directly or indirectly about collaboration with other people and communication with other people. Okay, leadership, even for non-managers, a time you led something, you motivated other people, you took charge of a situation. So basically, this ties into what we were just talking about. If you're talking about teamwork, you're talking about collaboration. Usually that's going to involve communication with other people, like how you divvied up the work, how you assigned roles. If there were developments, maybe some setbacks, how did you resolve them? You obviously had to communicate to do all these things. So that's kind of a part of that. Now, that also ties into things like this, right? If they're asking you about, they want to see signs of leadership, meaning that, you influenced other people, you got other people to do things, right? Either because they wanted to do things for you, or you asked them to do something for you to make an entity flow, right? So if you're all working on a project or a problem together, these would be great stories to tell because they show all this stuff at the same time. Okay. Change is a big one. The rules change. How did you handle that? They rolled out new software at work. How did you handle that? Things like this. Ethics and integrity. Okay, facing an ethical dilemma. Action A is better for the company, but action B is better for the customer that you're purporting to serve, right? The rules say one thing, but what the right thing to do is the other thing, right? How did you handle that? So if you have any examples of that, any stories from your past that talk about this stuff, it might make sense to prepare at least one of those in your list of sort of 10 stories that you rehearse and you come prepared to the job interview for, that you could pull out at any moment and start telling that story depending on what question they ask you. Time management. Now we're getting into, I don't know if they're going to ask you this kind of stuff in every interview. These are sort of nice to haves. Okay, they could ask about this, but it's not a sure thing. Same with this, like we addressed before. They could ask this. It's not a guarantee that they will. This is probably more of a sure thing, right? They may ask directly, specifically, or it might be implied. They're looking for signs that you're good at this, in how you answer other questions, right? Okay, the real structure. This is the important part. Can you work with people? Okay, so conflict, teamwork, and communication. That's a big thing they're going to be wondering. So if you tell stories and give examples of situations where you did this stuff, that's going to really help, okay? Can you do the job? Problem solving, achievement, time management. I mean, if you know what you're doing, if you've been in this type of job before, and this is your technical area, you should know how to do that. But keep in mind that these people, they usually are not trained in the technical areas of the job that they're hiring for. If you're dealing with a recruiter or someone like that, so you have to spell it out for them. You have to say like, well, I applied my knowledge this way, or I applied my training. My training kicked in and, I was trained on that situation, so I just applied what I knew and it fixed the problem. Okay, so can you handle pressure? That's where they ask you about stress. don't go into great detail, generally speaking, about like stress, because like I said earlier, you end up talking about a lot of negative things. You end up talking about how you get stressed, which you don't want them to think that you're going to be stressed all the time if they hire you. You also end up talking about times when you were stressed. That leads them to think that you're the type of person that gets stressed a lot, So just keep that in mind. It's best to minimize these things. And finally, will you improve or just sit there? This is not a surefire thing that they will ask you about this. It's more of a, it's something that you sometimes see, but it's not going to be in every interview. Okay. Okay, so we got a whole bunch of stuff here, and I would encourage you, by the way, to do this. Now, one thing I'd like to mention is that behavioral interview questions. Okay, this is the second type of job interview question. The first type was the standard list of questions, like what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, where do you see yourself in 5 years, why did you leave your last job, introduce yourself, tell me about yourself, do you have any questions for us, how do you handle stress? Those are standard interview questions. Behavioral questions, the problem is that there's literally a million of these. So you can't really go about preparing for them the same way that you would prepare for standard interview questions. You can't memorize a million answers. So you do it in reverse. You think of about 10 stories, like I said, your best accomplishments, your best, most shining moments dealing with things, and a good cross-section of different types of stories. And then whatever they choose to ask you, the idea is you pull out one of those 10 stories, whichever one is the closest match to what they're asking. And that way you always have an answer. And these stories have been vetted. They've been approved. They're safe to say in the interview. So that's how you knock these questions out of the park. Okay, now there are other types of job interview questions too, beyond what we've discussed here. There's things that are like not the standard traditional questions, like tell me about yourself, but at the same time, they're also not behavioral questions. Some examples are things like, if you were an animal, what kind of animal would you be? Or estimation questions, like they might decide to try and convince you that they're clever, and they pull an off-the-wall question, out of their bag, and they say, okay, how many golf balls can fit in this room or something, like as an estimation question. What other types of questions could they conceivably ask in a job interview? Beyond, obviously, what I've stated. Because you do get other things. Sometimes it throws people for a total curveball. It's a source of worry for a lot of people preparing. Okay, so other types of interview questions. So brain teasers or estimation questions. That was the, like, how many golf balls fit in a bus? How many gas stations are in Canada? What they're testing, they're not asking you for like a very specific answer. You don't just have to know the answer. That's not what this is about. Okay, they're looking for structured thinking, comfort with ambiguity. What that means is you don't know the exact answer, but you can estimate, you can guesstimate kind of, the order of magnitude of what the answer might be. Your ability to talk through your reasoning. Okay, so that's why they ask these. They don't care about the final answer, they care about how you approach the problem. Hypothetical or scenario questions. What would you do if your boss gave you an impossible deadline? Right? So this is like testing, what your behavior is. What would you do if a client was unhappy? Now, a good source for these is that they're similar to behavioral questions in that, if you've been in a similar situation in the past, you can answer these like it's a behavioral question and say, well, that actually happened to me, something very similar to that, and this is what happened, this is what I did, this is how it turned out. Okay? Personality or culture fit questions. If you were an animal, what would you be? I'm going to put a link. Check out my awesome video on how to answer that question. Not a common question, not anymore, but you do get it occasionally. So check out my video on that. What motivates you? What kind of work environment do you prefer? Those are actually much more common. they'll say, what does success look like to you? Right? That can stump and annoy technical people because you're at a job interview, expecting to demonstrate your suitability for the role and your qualifications for the role. And then you get asked these extremely general questions about something other than technical matters. And so it can throw some people for a loop. But, in a hard to believe kind of way, there is a method behind this madness. And, this is what they're trying to get at, right? They're trying to see if you're suited to this job, because some people will just take a job for the money. Other people, they obviously need money, but they are taking a job that they particularly enjoy. They're doing this work is something they particularly enjoy, as opposed to all other jobs. And those are the people that recruiters and hiring managers are looking for. Okay, so what they're testing: fit with the team and the culture, self-awareness, whether you'll be easy to work with. That's a huge one. Okay, case question. So how would you increase revenue for this product? Why are our sales declining? Things like this. Those are more business questions, right? They may ask a non-business version of that by saying, like, we're in this department, we process work orders. We recently upgraded our computer system to be more efficient. Why are our work orders taking more and more time instead of less and less? Things like that. And they'll just see what you think. And so they test kind of, your knowledge of processes and stuff like that. So that not too much you can do to really study for that, but just remember, like, tie it to something that is somewhat similar that you might have seen before, and then it's easy to answer. A lot of times they might not care about the actual answer, but like the estimation question, they want to see your reasoning. That's the reason why they're asking. Okay, you could get asked technical questions, especially in like entry-level jobs or first career jobs. So, I don't know if there's really too much you can do to study for those. Resume deep dive questions. I recommend that the way you answer "tell me about yourself" is by giving a 45-second summary of your resume. Just give them the broad strokes. I got this education, I worked here in this role, then I worked here in this role. Now I'm here and I'm excited to learn about this. Something like that. So they kind of get an overview of you at the beginning. That's usually a good idea. Okay, so there's a lot of things. A lot of these, I don't think these are going to be very common. They're not really doing stress interviews that much anymore. Ethical trap questions. Would you break a rule to hit a target? A lot of these, they're unanswerable in the sense that you don't know what these people want to hear. Sometimes they're looking for the ethical answer, which is what they should be looking for. Other times, not so much. But when it's not so much, it's usually an organization you don't want to end up working for anyway. Okay. Reverse psychology questions. These are clever, but don't fall for their trap. It's a very transparent trap. They're trying to get the dirt on you by asking stuff like this. Why shouldn't we hire you? Okay, you don't want to eliminate yourself, so don't give them any material here. There are strategic ways to answer these types of questions. It's very similar to what are your weaknesses. Check out my videos that go in great detail onto those questions. And that's about it. Those are the common ones. They can ask an infinite number of questions, an infinite variety of questions. We've covered all the major ones here. I just want everyone to remember, okay, this is very important. Job interviews are not about your qualifications. Don't be fooled by the fact that the content of the interview tends to focus on your qualifications and your experience. That's really not what these interviews are about. The real thing that they're about are your soft skills, what you're like as a person. That is the entire purpose of talking to you in real time, whether it's like in a Zoom call or something, or in person. It is painful and inconvenient for everyone to speak in real time. It would be much easier for you to fill in a form and email it to them. That would be a lot easier. But they intentionally do interviews because they want to see what you're like. So remember, the application stage, when you sent in your application, that was about your technical qualifications, right? What they did is they looked at your application, presumably it had your resume attached, and based on the strength of that, they gave you an interview. So what that says is that they believe, on paper at least, you are fully qualified to do this job from a technical point of view. The big unknown now is what you're like as a person, because someone can be technically qualified to do a job. They can be very qualified to do a job, but they could be so off-putting or so hard to work with that people don't want to hire them, right? So that's what this is really about. The number one factor in a job interview is your likability. So go in there, try to look at least somewhat pleasant and approachable, like I'm trying to do now. Be very agreeable, be friendly, be the person they would want to work with. And that will get you far. Hopefully this has made sense. Thanks very much. Check out the links in the end screen and also in the description box under this video for links to how specifically to answer a lot of these questions. I've done videos on all of these, and I will attach a playlist. Thanks very much for watching. You guys are awesome. Take care. I'll see you soon.